A detective's worst nightmare is when the pieces of a puzzle start to form a picture they wish they could unsee. In a dimly lit interrogation room, the seasoned detective sat across from a 13-year-old boy, his face still carrying the innocence of childhood, yet something darker lurked behind those eyes.
Christian Fernandez was just 12 years old when he killed his 2-year-old half-brother.
As the detective peeled back the layers of the case, a chilling realization dawned. The true monster wasn't lurking in the shadows, but was sitting right in front of him. Christian Fernandez, a name that would soon send shockwaves across the country. Raised in a home filled with neglect and cruelty, this young boy's life was far from ordinary. His parents, who were supposed to care for him, instead created an environment of fear and suffering. This constant mistreatment built up in Christian, and his simmering anger eventually boiled over in a way no one could have imagined. At just 13 years old, Christian became the youngest person ever to be charged as an adult with first-degree murder. What could push a child to commit such a terrible crime? To understand this, we need to look beyond the crime itself and delve into the heart-wrenching story of Christian's life and the harrowing experiences that shaped him. Disturbing incidents. Christian Fernandez entered the world in Miami, Florida in 1999, a city known for its vibrant culture and warm climate. However, Christian's family history was far from ordinary. His father, at the young age of 25, faced a grim legal consequence, a 10-year probation sentence. The reason? He had sexually assaulted Susana when she was just 12 years old. The scars of that traumatic event lingered, casting a shadow over their family dynamics. As Christian grew, life took another dark turn. In October 2010, Christian's world shifted once more. He lived with his mother and her new husband, a blended family trying to find stability. But fate intervened when Christian suffered a severe eye injury. His school acted swiftly, sending him to the hospital for a retinal damage evaluation. Christian claimed that his stepfather had struck him, leaving the family in turmoil. The apartment they called home became a scene of both tragedy and mystery. Officers arrived to find Christian's stepfather dead by gunshot, a desperate act that left everyone reeling. The unanswered questions hung heavy in the air. Why did he take his own life? What had driven him to such despair? Yet fate wasn't done with Christian. On June 3, 2011, deputies returned to the same apartment, their footsteps echoing with sorrow. This time it was Christian's infant brother, David, who lay lifeless. Bloodstains on Christian's shirt caught their attention, prompting them to question him about the events of that fateful day. The room felt suffocating as Christian grappled with the weight of it all, the loss, the confusion, and the haunting memories. In the midst of tragedy, Christian's innocence collided with harsh realities. The police sought answers, and Christian's mother faced unimaginable grief. The apartment walls held secrets, and the bloodstains whispered of pain and loss. The interrogation. In the interrogation room, the atmosphere is tense, with Christian positioned in a corner opposite the detective. Yet instead of leaning into the pressure, the detective wisely shifts tactics, aiming to draw out the boy's thoughts through a calm, conversational approach. She starts by explaining his rights in a way that's easy to understand, almost as if she's guiding him through a school lesson. This approach subtly shifts the environment from an interrogation to something more familiar and less intimidating for Christian. The detective notices Christian's confusion over signing his name in cursive and gently reassures him. She casually engages with him about school, building a rapport that makes Christian feel more at ease. The detective's calm demeanor is impressive, considering the complexity of the case at hand. As the conversation unfolds, the detective turns her focus to a troubling incident from January, when Christian's younger brother, David, broke his leg. She begins by asking Christian to recount exactly how the injury occurred, her tone measured but insistent. Christian describes the incident with a certain detachment, mentioning that David had been placed in an odd position, akin to a reverse Indian-style sitting. The detective listens intently, her mind racing as she tries to piece together the implications of Christian's description. To gain further insight, she inquires whether they had been watching something on TV or if Christian had seen such a position in a book or some other source. Christian's response is vague, but the detective remains patient. She gently asks him to use a doll to demonstrate how he had positioned David's legs. As Christian awkwardly manipulates the doll, the detective observes closely, noting any discrepancies between his demonstration and the details he previously provided. She then inquires about the sounds that accompanied the injury: a snap, a pop, anything that might provide clues. Christian denies hearing any such sounds, but the detective persists, her probing aimed at drawing out a clearer picture of the events. The conversation shifts to what Christian told his mother immediately after the accident. His recollections are hazy, and he appears uncertain about how much to reveal. The detective senses that Christian might be withholding information, possibly influenced by a lack of proper guidance or pressure from his mother. She carefully navigates this area, trying to uncover any hints of manipulation or concealment. Her questioning suggests that there may have been an environment at home that encouraged or allowed for such evasive behaviors. As the detective digs deeper, a troubling pattern begins to emerge. The way Christian speaks of his mother's response, or lack thereof, hints at a broader issue of neglect or inadequate parenting. The detective's observations point to a troubling environment where Christian may have learned to cover up the truth rather than confront it. This realization adds a layer of complexity to the case, revealing not just a singular incident of injury, but a potentially dysfunctional home life that could be influencing Christian's actions and responses. The detective's patience and persistence begin to pay off as she continues to unravel the layers of the story. As she navigates through the intricacies of the case, she remains focused on uncovering the truth, not just for David's sake, but to address the underlying issues that contributed to the troubling events. Hiding the truth. The detective's instincts flared as she listened to Christian's account, sensing something was off. His story was too neat, too rehearsed, lacking the natural messiness that usually accompanies the truth. Christian explained that he and David were alone in their room, and he had asked David to carry some books. He described how the books had slipped from David's grasp and fallen on him, trying to paint the scene as a simple, unfortunate accident. But as the detective scrutinized his account, doubts crept in. The injuries David sustained were far too severe to be explained by a few books falling. The swelling on his head, the bruises, these were not the result of a minor mishap. The detective noted how Christian avoided eye contact, his discomfort becoming increasingly apparent as she pressed for more details. Christian's behavior suggested that he was no stranger to deception, and the inconsistencies in his story were glaring. The detective knew she had to dig deeper. The injuries indicated something far more violent had occurred, something Christian wasn't willing to admit. She mentally reconstructed the scene, comparing it to the evidence at hand, and realized that the pattern of trauma didn't align with Christian's version of events. It was as if he was trying to cover up something more sinister, something that couldn't be dismissed as a mere accident. Christian's explanations grew more tenuous as the detective subtly confronted him with the inconsistencies in his story. His discomfort was palpable, his attempts to sidestep the truth becoming increasingly transparent. The detective recognized that she was dealing with a complex mix of fear, guilt, and perhaps even remorse. Yet she remained determined to uncover the full truth. As she continued to probe, the detective sensed that Christian was beginning to crack under the pressure. His story, once delivered with a semblance of confidence, was now unraveling. The more she pressed, the more Christian's facade crumbled, revealing the troubled emotions he had been trying so desperately to hide. The detective realized that she needed to be cautious. She couldn't afford to push Christian into complete silence, but she also couldn't let him escape the consequences of whatever had truly transpired that night. The truth was slowly coming to light, but it required careful handling. The detective knew that this case would take her down unexpected paths, leading her deeper into the shadows of Christian's deception. The emotional approach. In the dimly lit interrogation room, the tension was palpable. The detective knew that gaining Christian's trust was crucial, especially given the gravity of the situation. She understood that a direct, aggressive approach might close off communication, so she decided to use a more emotionally nuanced strategy. The detective began by creating a non-threatening environment. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft and reassuring, aiming to build a rapport with Christian. Her goal was to make the boy feel understood rather than attacked. This technique is often employed in interviews with vulnerable individuals to lower their defenses and encourage them to open up. She started the conversation gently, focusing on Christian's well-being.
Okay. have the right to stop answering questions at any time and consult the lawyer.
rather than immediately pressing him about the incident. She spoke in a calm, almost maternal tone, asking him about his feelings and how he had been coping. This approach was intended to help Christian feel more comfortable and less like he was under interrogation. By showing empathy and concern, the detective hoped to prompt him to reveal his true thoughts and feelings. As Christian's responses became more hesitant, the detective subtly shifted her focus to the specifics of the case. She reminded him of the importance of being truthful. This emotional appeal was designed to resonate with Christian on a personal level, highlighting the impact of his actions on his family. The detective emphasized that telling the truth was an act of bravery and would ultimately help everyone involved, including himself. She carefully pointed out inconsistencies in Christian's story, but did so in a way that was non-confrontational. For example, she acknowledged his previous statements about David climbing the ladder and falling, but then gently questioned how that accounted for the severity of David's injuries. By framing her questions in a way that made Christian reflect on his actions and their consequences, the detective aimed to spark a sense of moral responsibility within him. Throughout the conversation, the detective maintained a delicate balance. She was firm in her questioning, but also compassionate in her delivery. She avoided casting judgment or expressing frustration, instead offering Christian a chance to explain himself in a more reflective manner. Her goal was to help Christian understand the gravity of the situation and the importance of honesty rather than simply pressuring him for answers. As Christian's demeanor shifted from defiant to more subdued, the detective continued to build on this emotional connection. She reassured him that everyone makes mistakes and that facing the truth was a crucial step toward making things right. This approach aimed to alleviate some of the fear and shame Christian might have been feeling, making it easier for him to confront his actions openly. The confession. As Christian's guilt began to swell like a tidal wave, the detective knew she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She had been patient, carefully peeling back the layers of Christian's story, knowing that the truth was buried somewhere beneath his fragile defenses. She asked him to recall every detail, no matter how small, as if the truth could be hidden in the tiny fragments of memory he was trying so hard to suppress. Christian's responses were hesitant at first, his words laced with uncertainty and fear. But the detective knew better than to push too hard. Instead, she softened her tone, becoming almost nurturing, as if to reassure the boy that he wasn't alone in this dark moment. Slowly, Christian's defenses began to crumble. His eyes, once evasive, now met the detective's with a mixture of fear and resignation. It was as if he realized there was no escaping the truth, no way to continue hiding behind the lies he had told himself and others. The detective asked again about the bookshelf.
Just books.
How David had ended up there. What had happened in those final moments before the terrible accident? Christian's voice cracked as he finally admitted it. He had pushed his little brother harder than he intended. The sound of David's head hitting the wooden shelf echoed in his memory, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He described the moment with a numb detachment, as if recounting someone else's actions. But the guilt was there, a heavy, suffocating presence that filled the room. He explained how, in a blind panic, he had dragged David's limp body to the bottom bunk, hoping somehow to undo what he had done, to pretend that nothing had happened. But the blood told a different story, and deep down, Christian knew there was no hiding from it. The detective listened, her heart heavy, as the full weight of the confession settled between them. The confession itself was a slow, agonizing process, a reluctant release of the truth that had been growing inside Christian for hours, maybe even longer. Yet with the detective's gentle persistence, the truth finally emerged in all its tragic clarity. Christian was no longer just a child in that moment. He was a boy who had crossed a line he could never uncross, a boy who now had to face the terrible consequences of his actions. The detective, too, felt the gravity of the situation. She had seen confessions before, but this one was different. This one was born from a place of deep, unimaginable pain. It became clear that Christian's story was not just about a crime, but about a life shaped by neglect, fear, and desperation, culminating in an act that would change everything forever. Mother's negligence. Maternal negligence played a crucial role in the tragedy that unfolded, underscoring the severe consequences of inadequate parental care. During the pivotal day when David was injured, Christian was left in a perilous situation due to his mother's repeated absences and inattentiveness. She had been out driving for an extended period, leaving Christian, who was only a child himself, responsible for his younger brother. This lack of supervision not only created an unsafe environment, but also highlighted a troubling pattern of neglect that had long been present in their home. When Christian's injuries first occurred, the response from their mother was alarmingly detached. Instead of seeking immediate medical attention for David, she took her time coming home, where she cleaned up and changed clothes, showing a concerning lack of urgency. Her subsequent actions, searching online for information about concussions and unconsciousness rather than calling for medical help, further demonstrated her neglectful approach. Even after Christian called her around 9 a.m., it wasn't until 5:25 p.m. that David received the necessary medical care, leaving him in a dangerously prolonged state of suffering. This negligence wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of poor parenting that had repeatedly jeopardized the safety and well-being of her children. Christian's testimony revealed that while he occasionally had to babysit, the situation was far from a reliable safety net. The mother's lack of proper oversight, coupled with her failure to address the severity of David's condition in a timely manner, illuminated the dire need for more effective parenting. The tragic outcome of David's injury, compounded by the mother's inaction, reflects a deep-seated problem within the family dynamics. It reveals how chronic neglect can have devastating effects, ultimately highlighting the urgent need for systemic support to address such critical issues in parental care and child safety. Ignorant parenting. The interrogator probes Christian's grasp of his actions. At just 12 years old, Christian appeared to have little understanding of the potential harm his behavior could cause. The detective notes that this ignorance is often indicative of neglectful parenting, suggesting that Christian's upbringing lacked the necessary guidance and supervision. Christian referred to his actions as playing the Indian, a term he used without comprehending that it could result in breaking his brother's bones. His naivety and the consequences of his actions reflect a troubling environment where such serious matters were never properly addressed. When David fell unconscious, Christian's immediate reaction was to try and care for him. He placed his brother gently in bed, hoping he would wake up, which showed a sincere but misguided attempt to help. Christian's repeated inquiries about whether doctors could wake David up highlighted his genuine concern and anxiety over the situation, further emphasizing his lack of intent to cause harm. The detective steps out of the room, allowing Christian a few moments to absorb the gravity of the situation. Upon returning, the detective delivers the devastating news about David's condition. Christian is taken aback to learn that David's injury was severe, with swelling in the brain suggesting significant trauma. This revelation hits Christian hard, and he struggles to grasp the full extent of what has transpired. In his confusion, Christian tries to make sense of his actions, questioning why he pushed David twice. His admissions of uncertainty and lack of understanding about his own behavior reflect his distress in the chaotic nature of his upbringing. Recognizing the deep emotional impact on Christian, the detective decides it is time to inform Christian's mother about the gravity of the situation. The sentence. The interrogation room was filled with a tense and serious atmosphere. The detectives carefully presented the evidence, speaking with a mix of professionalism and intense questioning. They questioned Christian about the night of the crime, with each query aimed at uncovering more details of his account. Still, Christian's responses were fragmented, indicating a brain grappling with the intricacies of the situation. His answers appeared muddled by confusion and limited understanding, which was typical of his youth and the hardships he had faced. As time passed, it became clear that Christian's confession was a complicated mess. Even with the confession being clear, there were significant legal hurdles ahead. The judge's final decision was that Christian did not completely comprehend his Miranda rights, which are important protections designed to inform individuals of their right to stay silent and have a lawyer present. This judgment made the confession legally questionable. However, the gravity of the offense could not be avoided. As an adult, Christian was found guilty of committing first-degree murder, highlighting the seriousness of his actions regardless of his age. The court case also dealt with a distinct accusation of sexual assault. Nevertheless, this accusation was dropped, in part due to Christian's age when the alleged crime occurred. The justice system decided to give Christian a juvenile life sentence, keeping him in a detention center until he turns 19. However, as of July 2018, there was a small change in his situation. Christian was put on probation with strict conditions. He was not allowed to interact with minors and was limited from contacting his remaining siblings unless they initiated contact. The tragedy also resulted in legal repercussions for Christian's mother. She admitted manslaughter and received a 10-year probation sentence. This situation serves as a clear example of how a child, carrying a history of mistreatment and lack of care, ended up facing a serious predicament that led to permanent outcomes. In the dim aftermath of this tragic case, the profound consequences of neglect and abuse become starkly evident. Christian Fernandez's story underscores a haunting truth about how deeply childhood trauma and a lack of proper guidance can shape a life and lead to unimaginable outcomes. The tragedy of David's death is a somber reminder of the profound impact of a fractured family environment. As Christian grapples with the weight of his actions and the justice system delivers its verdict, the case serves as a poignant reflection on the urgent need for better support systems for at-risk youth. It also raises critical questions about responsibility, both personal and societal, in preventing such devastating outcomes. Thank you for joining us as we explored this deeply unsettling case. The story of Christian Fernandez is a stark reminder of the profound effects that a troubled upbringing can have on a young life and the tragic consequences that can follow. If you like these kinds of videos, then subscribe for more content.